Nobody expected it. The producers were in panic. The cameras didn't know what to do. Morgan Freeman had gone off script, turning to Jimmy Fallon with a letter in his hand. And the first sentence he read made the entire studio cry. But to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to the beginning of that night. A night that started like any other episode of The Tonight Show, but would end as one of the most emotional moments in late-night television history. It was a Thursday evening in New York City. The Tonight Show studio was buzzing with its usual energy. The audience had lined up for hours, excited to see Jimmy Fallon do what he does best, make people laugh. The guest list looked promising. A comedian, a musician, and then the legendary Morgan Freeman to close out the show. Jimmy walked out to thunderous applause, his signature smile lighting up the room. He did his monologue, cracked jokes about the news, played a game with the first guest. Everything was going according to plan. The producers in the control room were relaxed. The teleprompter was rolling smoothly. Just another successful night at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. But behind that smile, Jimmy Fallon was carrying something heavy. Something the audience didn't know. Something the producers had tried to keep away from the show. 3 weeks earlier, Jimmy had lost someone who changed his life forever. Her name was Eleanor Mitchell. She wasn't famous. She wasn't a celebrity. She was a 78-year-old retired schoolteacher from Vermont who had written Jimmy a letter 15 years ago, when he first started on Saturday Night Live. In that letter, she told him that his comedy had saved her life during her chemotherapy treatments. That his silly impressions and ridiculous sketches gave her a reason to laugh when doctors had given her only months to live. Jimmy had written back. And that single exchange turned into 15 years of correspondence. Birthday cards. Holiday letters. Photos of her grandchildren. Updates on her health. Eleanor had beaten cancer, and she credited Jimmy's laughter as part of her medicine. 3 weeks before this taping, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 78 years old. And Jimmy had told no one at the show except his wife. He wanted to keep working. He wanted to keep making people laugh. Because that's what Eleanor would have wanted. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The show continued. The musical guests performed. The audience clapped along. And then, the announcer's voice filled the studio. Please welcome Morgan Freeman. The audience erupted. Morgan walked out with that unmistakable grace, his presence commanding instant respect. He shook Jimmy's hand, sat down in the guest chair, and the interview began. They talked about Morgan's new film. They talked about his early career. They shared a few laughs. Jimmy was doing his job, keeping things light, keeping things moving. The producers were happy. 8 minutes until commercial break. Everything was on schedule. And then Morgan Freeman did something that wasn't in the script. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. An old, weathered envelope with handwriting on the front. Jimmy's face changed. His smile faded. He recognized that handwriting. Jimmy, Morgan said, his deep voice filling the suddenly silent studio. I need to stop this interview for a moment. The producers in the control room froze. This wasn't planned. The director didn't know which camera to cut to. The teleprompter operator stopped scrolling. Every single person in that building held their breath. Morgan continued. Before she passed, Eleanor Mitchell sent me a letter. She asked me to read it to you, on your show, in front of your audience. She said you would understand why. Jimmy's hands began to tremble. He looked down at his desk, then back at Morgan. His eyes were already glistening. How did you? Jimmy started, but couldn't finish. She found my address through a mutual friend. Morgan explained. She told me that you had given her 15 years of laughter. And she wanted to give you something in return. She wanted you to hear her final words from a voice you've always admired. The audience was completely silent. Many didn't know who Eleanor was, but they could feel the weight of the moment. They could see their beloved host, the man who made them laugh every night, fighting back tears. Morgan unfolded the letter carefully, as if handling something sacred. He cleared his throat, and in that voice that has narrated 1,000 stories, he began to read. Dear Jimmy, if Morgan is reading this, it means I've finally gone to meet my Harold. Don't be sad. I lived 30 years longer than any doctor predicted, and I owe at least 15 of those years to you. Jimmy removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. The camera stayed on him, capturing every raw emotion. Morgan continued reading. I remember the first time I saw you on television. I was sick. I was scared. I was alone in a hospital room at 2 a.m., unable to sleep because the fear was too loud. And then you came on screen, doing that ridiculous impression of someone I can't even remember now. But I remember laughing. For the first time in weeks I laughed. In the audience, people were crying openly now. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. A man in a Tonight Show t-shirt wiped his face with his sleeve. That laugh, Morgan read, his own voice carrying unexpected emotion, became my medicine. I started writing down your jokes to tell my nurses. I made my grandchildren watch your clips with me. You became part of my healing, Jimmy. Not because you knew me, but because you showed up every night and tried to make strangers smile. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Jimmy had given up trying to hide his tears. They streamed down his face freely now. He had removed his suit jacket at some point without even realizing it, loosening his tie, becoming less of a host and more of just a human being receiving a gift he never expected. The Roots, the house band, had set down their instruments. Questlove stood motionless behind his drums, watching. The usual energy of the show had transformed into something church-like, reverent. Morgan turned the page. I want you to know that I'm not afraid. I've had a beautiful life, filled with more laughter than tears, and you contributed to that. But I have one final request. He paused, looking at Jimmy. Are you ready? Jimmy nodded, unable to speak. My request is this, Morgan read. Keep going. Keep being silly. Keep doing those ridiculous games and strange impressions. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's another person in a hospital room at 2 a.m. There's another scared soul who needs a reason to laugh. You might never meet them. You might never know their name. But you will save them, Jimmy. Just like you saved me. Morgan folded the letter carefully. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. But he wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out something small. A pin. An old, tarnished pin with a laughing face on it. She asked me to give you this, Morgan said. She wore it to every chemotherapy session. She called it her Jimmy pin. She said it reminded her that no matter how dark things got, there was always a reason to smile. Jimmy stood up from his desk. He didn't say anything to the producers. He didn't look at the cameras. He walked around his desk, past Morgan's chair, and did something that broke every rule of late-night television. He walked off the stage and into the audience. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The cameras scrambled to follow him. The producers were shouting in their headsets. But Jimmy didn't care. He walked to the front row where he had spotted something earlier in the show, a woman wearing a handmade sign that said, Eleanor's granddaughter. He had noticed her during the monologue but hadn't understood. Now he did. The young woman, no older than 25, stood up with tears streaming down her face. Jimmy embraced her without words. The audience around them began to stand, one by one, until the entire studio was on their feet. Morgan Freeman remained on stage, watching. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. In his 60 years of acting, he had been part of countless emotional scenes. But this wasn't acting. This was real. Jimmy held Eleanor's granddaughter for what felt like an eternity. When he finally pulled back, she handed him something. A small stack of letters, tied with a ribbon. These are all the letters you sent her, she said, her voice barely audible. She kept every single one. She wanted you to have them back. Jimmy looked at the letters in his hands. 15 years of correspondence. 15 years of connection with a stranger who became family. He walked back to the stage, still holding the letters. He didn't sit behind his desk. He sat on the edge of the stage, his feet dangling over, facing the audience directly. "I don't know what to say," he finally spoke, his voice cracking. "I do this job because I love making people laugh. I never thought. I never imagined." He couldn't finish. Morgan walked over and sat beside him on the stage edge. Two men, side by side, sharing a moment that transcended entertainment. "You don't have to say anything, Jimmy," Morgan said. "Eleanor already said it all." The audience began to applaud. Not the usual applause of a talk show. This was something different. This was gratitude. This was recognition. This was hundreds of people acknowledging that they had witnessed something sacred. Jimmy pinned Eleanor's laughing face pin to his jacket. He would wear it for every show after that night. The episode ended without the usual fanfare. No final comedy bit. No teasing tomorrow's guests. Just Jimmy, sitting on the edge of his stage, reading through 15 years of letters while the credits rolled. In the weeks that followed, something changed about The Tonight Show. Jimmy still told jokes. He still played games. He still did ridiculous impressions. But there was something deeper in his eyes now. A understanding that every single night, someone out there needed this. Someone was watching at 2 a.m., scared and alone, looking for a reason to laugh. The Jimmy pin became a phenomenon. Viewers started sending in their own versions. Cancer patients, veterans with PTSD, people battling depression, they all created their own symbols of hope inspired by Eleanor's story. Jimmy kept a collection of them in his office, a reminder of why he does what he does. Morgan Freeman and Jimmy Fallon developed a friendship that extended far beyond that night. They would meet for dinner occasionally, never discussing the letter, but both understanding that they had shared something rare. Eleanor Mitchell never became a household name. She wasn't featured in magazines or trending on social media. She was simply a retired schoolteacher from Vermont who understood something profound, that laughter is medicine, and the people who make us laugh are healers whether they know it or not. And every night, before Jimmy Fallon walks out onto that stage, he touches the small pin on his jacket. The one with the laughing face. The one that reminds him that somewhere out there, someone is watching. Someone is scared. Someone needs to laugh. The letter Morgan read that night was later framed and hung in Jimmy's office, right next to a photo of Eleanor from one of her letters. Visitors to 30 Rock sometimes ask about it. Jimmy always tells them the same thing. "That's my reminder of why I'm here." The Tonight Show staff created an unofficial tradition after that episode. Every year, on the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, they take a moment before taping to remember her. Not with sadness, but with laughter. They share their favorite jokes, their silliest moments, their most ridiculous fails. Because that's what she would have wanted. Morgan Freeman, in a later interview, was asked about that night. He paused for a long moment before answering. "In all my years of acting," he said, "I've played God, I've played presidents, I've narrated the universe itself. But reading that letter to Jimmy, that was the most important performance of my life. Because it wasn't a performance at all." Eleanor's granddaughter, the young woman Jimmy embraced in the audience that night, went on to become a nurse. She works in oncology now, helping cancer patients through their darkest hours. She keeps a photo of her grandmother on her desk, wearing that same laughing face pin. And sometimes, late at night, she plays old Tonight Show clips for patients who can't sleep. The ripple effects of one letter. The legacy of one woman who understood that laughter matters. Jimmy Fallon has hosted thousands of episodes since that night. He's interviewed presidents and movie stars, musicians and athletes. He's played countless games, done hundreds of impressions, made millions of people laugh. But when asked about his proudest moment on television, he doesn't mention the celebrities or the viral clips. He talks about Eleanor. He talks about a letter. He talks about the night Morgan Freeman reminded him why any of this matters. And that's why he keeps going. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone is watching at 2 a.m. Someone is scared. Someone is alone. Someone needs a reason to laugh. And that's what Eleanor would have wanted.